Hello everyone, welcome back to Next Level Tarot. So today I'm going to review Prince Harry's book. Yes, just an introduction because there's already a lot to cover here. Grab something to drink because this is going to be a long one. If you have read this book, then this is going to be a very fun series for you. So Prince Harry starts off with describing the funeral of his grandfather. He left the UK in 2020, January 2020. 15 months later, he went back there to meet his father and brother and family for the first time. He describes this whole meeting and in very much detail. So he says, "When my wife and I fled this place in fear for our sanity and physical safety, I wasn't sure when I'd ever come back. That was January 2020. Now, 15 months later, here I was. I moved from the stone wall to a small wooden bench. So he was waiting for his brother and father, and he was leaning against the wall. But it took a while maybe for them to get there, so he decided to move to a wooden bench. But this sentence has a double meaning, meaning that he moved from a very secure place, the UK, the royal house, to a small wooden bench. You know, he left everything behind, all his security, and he had to start over. So it's beautiful how he writes this book. It's very deep. Then he describes that he is waiting for his father and brother to come in, and he feels a gust of wind, and it reminds him of his grandfather. So he felt the wind and he thought, oh, this is grandpa. You know how people say that when you feel wind, it can be a spirit and stuff. So he is aware of that. He is quite spiritual. Then he goes on to describe his grandfather, that he is someone with strong opinions, many passions, but also that his grandfather was a huge fan of Princess Diana, and that he basically coupled Prince Charles and Princess Diana. Then he says that if it wasn't for my grandpa, I wouldn't be here, William wouldn't be here, but maybe my mom would still be here. So he literally says this. Then again, maybe our mother would be here if she hadn't married Paul. So low-key, he's blaming his father for his mother's passing. Low-key. And then he describes the moment that his grandfather passed away. He said to Harry, "You have to know when it's time to go, Harry." He described that his grandfather lost the passion and the energy to do the things that he loved to do. And that's when he knew that it was time for him to go, to pass on. And this is very beautiful because I've never thought about it like that. It really gives a grounded perspective about death. And then he describes the royal burial ground. So all the royals get buried at one place. And he said that many of his ancestors are super obsessed with getting buried there. And then he asks himself the question, like, does it really matter where you are buried? I mean, it's not that you will know because you're dead, you're gone. But then he moves on to thinking about, well, maybe they do know. You know, he kind of asks all these questions that most people do about life, death, what happens after. So he says this, does consciousness, like time, have a stop? Or maybe, I thought just maybe, they're here right now. So he's talking about the family members that have been buried there. And if so, maybe my mother is here as well. So he's wondering if his mother is still around in spirit, you know? Then he goes on to describe his mother. He goes on and on and on and on about how amazing she is, how much he loved her. He literally says this, "The thought of her, as always, gave me a jolt of hope and a burst of energy and a stab of sorrow. I missed my mother every day. I found myself longing for her, and I couldn't say just why. Like so much about her, it was hard to put into words." So he really idolizes his mother. And then he goes on to, "Although my mother was a princess named after a goddess, but those terms always felt weak, inadequate." And then, this is interesting. People routinely compared her to icons and saints, from Nelson Mandela to Mother Teresa to Joan of Arc. And this is funny because Megan, she compared herself to Nelson Mandela, didn't she? So it's funny. And then he goes on to talk about how he still feels the presence of his mother, that he still can see her and hear her. This is what he says. How could someone so far beyond everyday language remain so real, so present, so vivid in my mind? How was it possible that I could see her, clear as the swan skimming towards me on the Indigo Lake? How could I hear her laughter, loud as the songbirds in the bare trees? Still, the way that he wrote this book is very poetic. And then he goes on to describe her even more, her devastating smile, her vulnerable eyes, her childlike love of movies and music and clothes and sweets, and us. So he means himself and William. Oh, how she loved my brother and me, obsessively, she once confessed to an interviewer. And then he says this, well, mommy, vice versa. So he's acknowledging here that he is quite obsessed with his mom. Interesting. And then he goes on to describe her even more. She was light, pure and radiant light. And how can you really describe light? Then he goes on to compare his mother to the morning star. The way that he describes his mother it's kind of over the top almost. He literally worships her. Also, in the Bible, the morning star, it's a reference to Satan, but also to Jesus. And then he goes on to describe that he asked for a secret meeting with his brother and father. And then he kind of promises to himself that he doesn't want to fight, that he's here to make peace because that's what his mom wanted. Because his mom is someone that always wanted to bring peace to the world. She worked with AIDS patients, she walked through minefields, she helped orphans. He wanted to meet his father and brother, and he had that in mind, that his mother always wanted to bring peace. He didn't want them to feel bad or something. He wanted to address the situation of him leaving the royal house. Then he describes the moment that his father and brother come to meet him, right? He sees them walking towards him from a distance. Then, at last, I saw them, shoulder to shoulder, striding towards me. They looked grim, almost menacing. More, they looked tightly aligned. This is interesting. So he felt that his brother and father had, a closer connection because the way that they're coming towards him was more aligned. It was synchronized. Then he said that at that moment when he saw that his stomach dropped because he probably was scared in some type of way because he felt that it was two people against one. Then he says, the thought occurred, hang on, are we meeting for a walk or a duel? His intention was to talk things out, to be vulnerable with his brother and father. But then the way that they approach him, it felt almost like threatening. And then he says this, now my heart really started thrashing in my chest. Deep breaths, I told myself. So he kind of gets an anxiety attack. When he saw his brother and father come towards him, he says this, apart from fear, I was feeling a kind of hyper-awareness and a hugely intense vulnerability, which I experienced at other key moments in my life. Walking behind my mother's coffin, going into battle for the first time, giving a speech in the middle of a panic attack. So he basically admits that he had a panic attack that moment when he saw his brother and father after 15 months for the first time again. Then he kind of prays to his mother because he says this, there was that same sense of embarking on a quest and not knowing if I was up to it, while also fully knowing that there was no turning back. Okay, mommy, I thought. I picked up the pace. Here it goes. Wish me luck. So this shows that Harry prays to his mother you know, in moments where he feels insecure or he has anxiety, he prays to his mom. So he still has a very strong, intense spiritual connection to his mother. So what happened after he meets his father and brother, I will cover that in another video. If you like this series, please let me know, otherwise I won't continue. And by the way, I have created my own blend of teas. It's completely organic. You will find it on Etsy. You will find all the information on Etsy. So this was the book review of Prince Harry. We only covered a few pages, but there's a lot. So let me know your thoughts, and until next time, bye.